Welcome to Florida Education News. My name is Dr. Tony Arza, and sitting down today with the Commissioner of Education, who we affectionately call Stasi. Thanks so much for sitting down
Thank you.
with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, look, a lot of things have changed in education in Florida, and I want to start off by just acknowledging and congratulating you on being a finalist for, Polk State College. It's a tremendous honor, and it's a lot of exciting things happening there. Could you kind of share a little bit of your role in education, specifically during the DeSantis administration and your time here at the department?
Well, look, again, thank you for having me on. It's a real honor to interact with someone like yourself, who I know has been alongside us in so many of these important education reforms that have been taking place that put students first, quite frankly. But it's surreal to have been selected sole finalist at Polk State College, because I don't think folks understand how much we've been working behind the scenes since the beginning. When the governor signed one of his initial executive orders, he said Florida was going to be #1 in workforce education by 2030. And the fact that we were able to announce recently, 5 years ahead of schedule, that we have met that threshold, that this governor has invested nearly $12 billion in workforce education, it's remarkable. And to see these programs across the state, how they're benefiting middle school students. We just announced one of our 5 Teacher of the Year finalists is an agriculture teacher in middle school in Osceola County. Remarkable program, and that's the direct result of the investments by the governor to look at education as not a one-size-fits-all approach, but to inspire students, to instill a passion so that they can look at education as an opportunity to advance themselves on to the next thing, so that they can come to love education and see the beauty in education and why it's so important. So over my time at the Department of Education, I've worked on a myriad of issues. I started off in the general counsel's office, I worked my way up to eventually be the general counsel. We had some of the biggest battles during that time, whether it was keeping schools open during COVID, pushing back on mask mandates, making sure parents had rights that were meaningful in the state of Florida so that we could empower them, especially after COVID. Parents really woke up and saw that they needed to participate more in education, and they needed the tools through laws to be able to have access to that participation. Transparency in curriculum and in these textbooks and library books was a big thing we took on. So quite a few challenges when Commissioner, and that was under Richard Corcoran, the first Commissioner of Education, who was a tremendous trailblazer. Then the next Commissioner of Education, Manny Diaz, equally as amazing, brought me or elevated me as the chief of staff of his. And during that time, we continued to build on the amazing work that Commissioner Corcoran started, thanks to the leadership of Governor DeSantis. I was fortunate to then eventually go be the Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor DeSantis, where I had multiple agencies in my portfolio, education, of course, being one of them. And then I was elevated about a year ago to be the Commissioner of Education by the State Board of Education.
Yeah, almost exactly about a year ago.
That's right.
And you talk about passion, trying to get kids passionate. So much has changed, especially since COVID. I mean, living through those years, and obviously there was a lot that was revealed about how the state was encroaching on people's rights, on parents' rights, and we saw what was happening in classrooms. And you've been extremely passionate about the issues that are impacting kids in the classroom. I know you tell the story about when you picked up your daughter at school one day, and it seems like this fight has been really important to you personally, right? People don't really see that, you have the media that there'll be a story about you going somewhere and yelling at school board members or superintendents, but that passion comes from because you care a lot about what's happening. Could you kind of share what's at stake in this fight that maybe some people don't realize the philosophical or the principles that are behind what you're fighting for and why you care so much about it?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I was raised by a single mother of 3 kids who was often overlooked by the public education system. Oftentimes she'd advocate for us and her voice was silenced because, she was looked at as someone that wasn't going to have great influence and, get people in trouble for not doing their jobs, essentially. So I've really taken on this role of being an advocate for voices that are often drowned out, and in the education system, unfortunately, it's parents. And we saw that during COVID. We saw how they really were not just passionate about what was going on in their children's classrooms, but they felt like they didn't have the tools necessary to be able to accomplish change. So we've been very intentional in this administration to equip them with the tools, give them the rights necessary so that they were entitled to have a say that they rightfully deserve. And I tell the story all the time. My mother took me home from birth. She clothed me, she fed me. She lost a lot of sleep making sure that decisions that were impacting my life as a minor were to my benefit. Every decision she wanted to make sure was one that was going to help me in life. And so to tell me that somehow she should not have the most say or influence when it comes to my education, I thought was preposterous. So that is where my passion comes from. I saw it firsthand as a child growing up. And truly, I don't want to fight for just the sake of fighting. When I call people out, it is because I think that leaders can do a better job. For example, with school board members, some of these situations that have taken place have been the result of school board members making statements that were just totally inappropriate. You recall Tina Certain out of Alachua County made a statement on social media saying that she no longer shops at Asian stores as a result of a negative experience. And this is a district that serves a population of students that are Asian. So to me, it seems like a terrible representation of what leadership should look like. And quite frankly, you are now causing students in that district, or teachers, or families, or employees of the district to feel alienated as a result of the way God created them. We should never do that. And I said in a memo in my first day in office, we are going to ensure that students do not get discriminated against based on the way God created them in this public education system. So to me, I was fulfilling my promise at my first day in office, telling folks that this was going to be something we did. Obviously, there are situations where that's happened with superintendents as well, and we call it like we see it. It's nothing personal. I try to maintain a good rapport with school board members and superintendents across the state, and I truly do elevate when they do a good job. Superintendent Carlin, for example, in Lee County, that is somebody who is advocating for the teachers and students in her district. And that is somebody who was very innovative when she tried to get the highest performing teachers into the lowest performing schools, give them pay incentives to go teach in those schools, and she was met with resistance from the teachers union. But I highlighted not just her willingness to take on that fight, but I sent it to all superintendents in the state, and I said, you should consider exploring this so that you can get the top performing teachers in front of the students that need it most. Thankfully, the legislature responded. Representative Persons Maleka, Senator Jonathan Martin, Representative Kincart Johnson, I know with this particular provision in House Bill 1279, so many folks, honestly, it's a very long list, and so many folks in the legislature saw this superintendent's passion, her willingness to want to step up and do what's right by parents and students and teachers for that matter. Yeah. And they codified it in legislation to give tools to superintendents across the state to make sure that they're able to, create a system where you're putting the best teachers in front of the students that need it most. Seems pretty logical to me.
No, I mean, and I think it's what I think I admire most about you as a human being and as a commissioner is that a lot of times in politics, I grew up around politics, is that sometimes people are afraid to, correct each other. We're afraid to correct adults and maybe risk offending someone. You haven't been afraid to offend people, and I think that that's something that is, a lot of courage in that. And I think I want to talk a little bit about taking on the fights with the unions, because there's, the unions historically have been extremely powerful in this country. In Florida, we've been fighting back against that for a long time, but there are still things that need to happen, and they recently filed a lawsuit, trying to challenge a lot of what this whole administration has stood for, what Commissioner Corcoran, Commissioner Diaz, and yourself have stood for and fought for. Could you kind of share a little bit for those who maybe don't understand what the lawsuit's about and why, it's unfounded? Obviously, the courts will decide, but, what do you think about that? Could you kind of explain a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, quite frankly, the lawsuit is about maintaining a monopoly over public education and asserting their relevance for a dying union, that is the teachers union. I think folks are seeing that they truly are not representing the teachers that they purport to represent. And this started during COVID. I know now Randy Weingarten likes to say that keeping schools open was the right decision, but let's not forget in the state of Florida, they sued us to try to keep schools closed. We fought back in court and we were successful. But that wasn't the only lawsuit that they sued us over, and this lawsuit is one of many that we have seen over the years. They sued us over prohibited expenditures going towards divisive concepts like diversity, equity, and inclusion and critical race theory. They sued us over the law that allows parents to have transparency to books and textbooks and materials that their children are going to be exposed to. They sued us just last year, at the end of the year, over syllabi, so that the syllabi cannot be public to students prior to registering for a course. And you have to ask yourself, why do they continue to file these lawsuits, which, by the way, they lose every single one of them. They will lose this one as well, and I am hopeful we will be able to overturn Bush v. Holmes, which is longstanding precedent in this state of Florida that really needs to be overturned considering the school choice landscape we're dealing with. But they will be unsuccessful because the reality is school choice is something that benefits families across the state. You're talking hundreds of thousands of families. Over 530,000 kids are on a school choice scholarship to go to a private school. Over 400,000 students are in a charter school. Over 150,000 students are in homeschool. And it's about 1.4 million total with all the different choice options out of the 2.8 million students in this education system that are benefiting from a school choice scholarship. So this lawsuit is not just about maintaining their relevance and a monopoly over public education, but it is a direct attack on families and their ability to be empowered to decide what is the best educational setting for my child that meets their individualized needs. Every student is different. Every student learns in a different way, and a parent knows best what is the child's ability to grasp certain concepts. And I'm not saying, this is not at all a disparagement to teachers. Teachers do amazing work, and I think it's imperative, particularly families who are putting their kids in schools, to work closely with teachers, because teachers do have an expertise in the subject area. Lord knows I'm dealing with math right now, homework every day after school with my girls, and I am often communicating with the teachers to understand the strategies that they're being taught in the school during the day so I can reinforce them and support the educator and their work in the classroom. But it is important that folks understand that the parent is the child's first teacher, and the parent is the most important decision maker when deciding what is the best educational setting for their child. This lawsuit is an attempt by the union to take that away from families across the state.
Yeah, and something that they often will try to bring up is they'll bring up accountability, and they want uniform accountability. And something that I think has been implied in a lot of the things you've said and a lot of things that you've said publicly is that parents are an accountability system, right? I mean, I think that the thing that people don't realize, and I think that what you're bringing up is that, like your mother, she cares for you. She's going to make the best decision for you. Can you share a little bit about why is it that you think that the unions don't trust parents? Because it seems like when you get to the bottom of it, it's, well, parents don't know, maybe they don't know, they just think that it looks nice. Like, there's this skepticism, and they think a system can protect their kids better than parents can. Could you share a little bit of your perspective? I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent. It just seems so divisive. It seems almost diabolical how you end up in this where you believe a system and a process can somehow protect children. And could you kind of share a little bit your perspective on that?
Well, it's kind of ironic that the union, who has fought for years on accountability metrics in schools at the public education level, are now suing for greater accountability in schools simply because they're not public schools. So we'll start in the hypocrisy there. But the reality is, look, the competition is going to drive what parents decide to do, right? Parents are going to vote with their feet. These numbers, where we're at now, 1.4 million students out of the 2.8 million, so about half of our population being in a choice program, is the decision of a parent. That, to me, is the greatest accountability metric. If it's not working, then they're going to pull their child out of that system, and they're going to place them either in a traditional public school, or they're going to place them in a homeschool setting, whatever's working best for that child's success, like any parent should decide. So that's kind of the irony in this lawsuit, and I've said it before, as it relates to these private schools, we have to remember, these are private schools at the end of the day, and so you want to make sure that you are threading the needle so that there is accountability in place, and we do have that. Same thing with charter schools. I mean, I got booed, let's not forget, I got booed by school board members at this association meeting that was taking place in Tampa because I recommended, well, you know, if you think that, you know,
you want more accountability.
You want, yeah, if you're saying that the accountability is less at the charter school level, I actually disagree. I think there are accountability metrics that are tougher in place than with the traditional public
They'll
school.
close.
Yeah, they'll get shut down, for example, if they're not meeting certain metrics within a period of time. So I said, should we apply the same accountability metrics to the traditional public schools? And that's when they booed me. So, you know, this is not about accountability. Let's be honest here.
No, I think that there's a lack of, and you know, and I think it's, look, I think people are good people. I think just sometimes they get a little bit confused, and there's been a lot of indoctrination going on for a long time in this country, in the education system. But, you know, you mentioned a couple times COVID, and a part of the whole COVID experience, at least for me, was that you had these experts that were trying to tell you what was good for you and your family and your kids, things that were so obvious to the normal person. And there was this division between, you know, the state and the experts, and then real people, parents, families. And it seems like all the distrust that now is in liberal institutions, there's a lot of distrust that people have in liberal education institutions, a lot of government institutions. But the institutions for a long time haven't trusted parents. And it kind of seems ironic that now they're like, oh, why don't parents trust, you know, Harvard? Why don't they trust higher education? There was a recent committee that had a report on it. I just kind of want to get your thoughts about how do you think that this parental rights will create more trust among all of us? I mean, you know, trusting parents. Could you kind of share a little bit?
Yeah, I think thanks to the leadership of Governor DeSantis, we were very intentional in our response to this lawsuit over keeping schools open. It's not that we just like blindly, without any research, decide that, you know, we are going to have a parent, for example, be a superintendent of a district or be the principal of a school. You will still have experts. In the same way we had experts testify at the litigation of keeping schools open. Folks forget, we had Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's now running the NIH, as our expert, who talked about how social distancing and some of these measures that could take place during COVID can be done in a way where you can still provide a safe and secure learning environment. So we certainly made sure that there was evidence and expertise involved in the decision making, but we also took into account the testimonies from parents who talked about, you know, students with unique abilities and how remote learning and distance learning did not resonate with their child. We heard from the head of the Urban League that talked about some of the challenges that the African American community, for example, were facing with respect to social distancing. English language learners, you know, many of them did not log on when there was this online platform, and so they were, you know, not receiving an education essentially for several months. That's a problem, and so I think those stories that were compelling from the parents of why it was so important to be able to get these students back into school, to be able to get those parents back to work, in addition to the expertise, is why we were so successful in the litigation and why we're successful as a state when it comes to education. We empower our parents, but we also follow, you know, evidence-based reading strategies, for example. You may recall a couple years ago, 3Qing was a big deal when it came to literacy, and you know, we consulted various literacy experts and made sure that we worked with the legislature to beef up what is the science of reading and ensure that that's in every one of our textbooks, because we knew that there was an opportunity for our students to thrive academically if we were to impose that legislation. But we also knew that that policy was one that supported parents, that empowered parents to be able to be brought to the table and to work alongside us, as opposed to, you know, the education experts know it all and you're going to do what they're saying. This needs to be a collaborative effort, and that's something that I've emphasized in every one of these statewide memos that I've issued to both parents and teachers. I'm actually working on one right now at the end of the school year as we wrap up the school year, just thanking them for the partnership and emphasizing the importance of a parent and a teacher working together to create a conducive learning environment for a child's success. That, to me, is what is missing in the traditional public education system, and what will make all the difference if we can really reach that milestone of everyone working together.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the working together piece. There are some superintendents who have embraced choice, and they're embracing choice more and more. I was recently with the superintendent of Miami-Dade, Jose Dotres, and he was telling me that they're actually going to have private religious schools leasing space from them. how do you envision in the future of public education more collaboration even from private schools and traditional public? Would you like to see more of that kind of innovation that Miami-Dade is enacting?
I definitely do. Um, Miami-Dade schools, where I graduated from, is actually ground zero for our new Schools of Hope law that's being implemented. I know there are 5 structures that Success Academy, who's coming down from New York, are going to be utilizing in the 27-28 school year. And I'm excited to see the results of the work, because you look at their proficiency rates in math and English in New York, and this is in Harlem, where you've got students that are coming from economic backgrounds that don't have many means, very similar to the way I grew up. And these are students that are demonstrating 92%, 96% proficiency levels in English and mathematics. We're currently at about 59 and 57%, 58% respectively. We're hoping to break that 60% threshold, but that doesn't compare to the success that we are seeing in New York. So absolutely, to the extent districts can be innovative to provide educational opportunities to reach those proficiency levels, so that every student has an opportunity to a 90%, to get 90% of our students proficient on grade level. I mean, that would just be amazing. And that's the kind of stuff that I tell folks all the time, particularly when I have conversations with superintendents. The ones that tend to be more successful are the ones that embrace innovation, they embrace this competition, because they're seeing that their students are performing better as a result. Competition is going to breed a better product. You see it across the board in our state's progress monitoring results. The numbers continue to get better and better as school choice continues to increase. Why? Because students are able to go where they want, and the folks at the district level, the folks who are running the schools, the teachers in the classrooms understand there is another option, and we have got to produce. If not, the students are going to walk out that door, the parents are going to vote with their feet, and they're going to decide what is the best educational learning environment for their child. To the public school advocates who want the children to stay in the traditional public school, great. You do a great job. The students academically succeeding, that child is likely to stay in your school. Same thing with the private schools. If you're doing a great job and you're producing a great product, I would imagine the parents are going to keep their child there. If it's not working out, then they're going to put their school in a different educational setting. But that's not a bad thing. Having that educational freedom is something that Florida is proud to rank #1 in every metric that I'm aware of, whether it's Parent Power Index, whether it's the Center for Education Reform or the Heritage Foundation, ALEC. I think the Center for Education Reform is the Parent Power Index, but ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, this is something that they all utilize to measure our success, education freedom. And that is directly involved with parental empowerment and student success. So yeah, I agree with you. The most successful school districts are going to be the ones that embrace competition, that embrace innovation, and embrace parental empowerment and ability for students to succeed in any educational setting.
Yeah, and I mean, this emphasis on choice and innovation, one of the things that have kind of blocked innovation has been the fact that it's been a monopoly. Obviously, we want a great education for every student, but sometimes the standards in the public schools, every public school can tend to look the same, and allowing for more choice has allowed for different views of education, different visions of education, classical education. Recently, you guys adopted the Phoenix Declaration, I think it's called.
That's right.
Obviously there's a different view of education that's there. I think it's not, it has some of the same foundational principles, but can you kind of talk about how are we rethinking as a state? How are families reevaluating what is the purpose and goal of education? Because it seems like that's also happening. There's a philosophical thing that's changing in the hearts and the minds of Floridians and ultimately Americans about what is the goal of education. Parents are choosing to homeschool, not necessarily maybe because their kids are going to be as proficient in certain subjects, but because they believe it's about forming the whole person and they feel like there's something missing. Could you kind of speak a little bit about what you think the purpose of education is? How have you tried to protect that, create space for that?
Yes. So you're seeing a rise, for example, in classical school settings that parents are choosing. Miami-Dade was one of those innovative districts that actually has the first public classical school in the state of Florida. And that was awesome to see that there's a wait list for families to want to get into. But when I hear from families and ask them on classical school, for example, what draws you to that? What appeals to you? They tell me it is the good, the true, and the beautiful. I go, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, you hear it all the time from the governor. We want, as parents, an education, not indoctrination. And it's not just academic success. It's, to your point, the character formation, this moral philosophy being infused. When you think of the true, for example, what is true history? Is it influenced by theory, or are we going to teach facts and what took place in history? Are you going to teach Western civilization, or are you going to be focused on things that, quite frankly, parents have concerns of whether or not it's even age and developmentally appropriate?
Or even if it's history,
Yeah.
or relevant to our history.
Correct. I tell people all the time, look, I'm a huge Florida Marlins fan. I think they go by the Miami Marlins now, but when I was a kid, it was the Florida Marlins. And in 1997 and 2003, they won the World Series. And you're not going to find another fan like me. However, we're not going to put that in the history books, even though it happened, because the reality is there are other things the state has prioritized to ensure that you are demonstrating proficiency when it comes to history. And so similarly, we want to make sure that in our curriculum that we are teaching, we are doing that. I know we just recently released the Fact U.S. History course. And of course, what's going to happen, College Board, who hates competition because they want a monopoly on AP U.S. History, is very critical of the course. And the media is very critical of the course. The reality is they're not pointing to anything within the course that they're critical of. They like to use the general term whitewashing history, but the reality is they haven't pointed to a section within the course that is doing that. This is a robust course that took quite a bit of time, but it is competition to a U.S. history course that has been under scrutiny for quite a bit of years from parents. And so you're going to see that as we pilot this out, the folks who are going to want to participate in it are parents who want their child to have an opportunity at something different than AP. That's a good thing. That's what we encourage in the state of Florida. Continuing to drive competition, continuing to drive innovation, continuing to empower parents so that they can decide, what do I want my child to be exposed to? That doesn't mean we're reducing the rigor or putting something out that's any less rigorous. It just means there's a different option. We dealt with this with the classic learning tests. You have the SAT and the ACT, and they have, their own sets of groups of parents who complain about some of the questions that they've seen there. And then you have parents who are putting their students through the classical education model, and they say, I would like, there to be a comparative test that my students are accustomed to learning from reading primary source documents, for example. That's something that is very common in a classical school. Well, the CLT is the test for you, because the CLT exactly measures some of these very dense primary source documents. And I'd argue it's probably even more rigorous than some of the other questions you're seeing on SAT or ACT. But we show no preference. It's just providing an opportunity for parents and for students to have an additional opportunity in the vein of education. I say it all the time. Whether you want to put your kid in traditional public, homeschool, charter, private, that's your prerogative as a parent. I do not favor one over the other, but we should always ensure that we are providing as many opportunities as possible. And it's not just linear in what that looks like. It's not just in the educational setting that you're putting the child. It's what are the courses that the child can now be exposed to? What are the assessments that the child can be exposed to for college entrance? That's been our approach in this administration, and it's proven to be very successful.
Yeah, and I think that, when you think about it, one of the greatest temptations when you're in a position of power is that you want to impose something. And, you could say, we want to make sure everyone's learning this. And, and you as a commissioner, Richard Corcoran had the same, Commissioner Diaz, the governor, to impose a vision of like, this is it, this is what it has to be. But this is a unique moment because they didn't do that. You guys risked on parents. And as a former teacher, when you're in a classroom, you want to give space for your students to express themselves. I see you emphasizing risk, we're risking on parents. And why is it worth that risk? Why is it so important you think that we as a state, and hopefully we can convert the union members over to our side on this, but it seems like, why is it worth risking on parents? Why is it really worth doing that? You could just say, this is it, we think this is the best. Instead, you're risking. Why are you doing that? What motivates you to do that?
the principle of always putting students first, understanding who the base is that you answer to, who is the customer in this product of education. It is the student. And the student is the product of the parent. And so you have to understand that in order to achieve success for that student, you have got to empower that parent to be a decision maker. I will note, we have not eliminated educational opportunities. I know we're often criticized when we create additional education opportunities, but we are not eliminating AP US History, for example. We are not eliminating the traditional public school system. We are not eliminating the SAT exam. We are simply adding additional options.
You're creating space.
Correct, so that a parent can decide, okay, I have this plethora of options. I mean, we enjoy it as adults on a day-to-day basis, right? I mean, we're not eliminating McDonald's, we're creating Burger King, and we're saying, okay, as a parent or as a consumer, which one do you prefer? You know, that's completely up to the individual. I mean, you have your own reasons
exactly.
why you choose what's better, but ultimately it's because you think one, nourishes you in a manner that is more enjoyable than the other, and that's your right as a human being. It should also be your right as a parent and a student.
And I think that one of the things that's interesting about capitalism is it risks on people. And, it's not just, competition for the sake of competition, but competition because these are human beings. They have their own relationship to truth. They have a conscience. And I think that one of the things that people lose sight of is they want to insert a system in the place of people's conscience. And somehow that a state or a system knows better than parents. The other thing that I wanted to get your perspective on is you mentioned once in a letter or a memorandum, I think you might have been at a board meeting, but you quoted the Psalms and you said that a child is a gift. And I kind of want to get a little bit of your perspective of, when you say that a child is a gift, how does that judgment, right? I mean, and whether it comes from the Psalms or not, I think it's true. I think the point is how do you see that gift character of a child? How does that inform the decisions, the way you lead, the way that this administration is led?
Sure. I will say two things. Number one, with respect to the taking a risk on parents, if we were plummeting, for example, and we were at, let's say, 64% A and B schools, and the next year we're at 30% A and B schools, something tells me we'd probably reevaluate. But the reality is, you look at the expansion of school choice, and we went from 64% A and B schools last year to now 71% A and B schools. 77% of our charter schools are A and B schools. And you look at the proficiency rates of students who are demonstrating proficiency in English and mathematics, and since the inception of school choice, you have over 100,000 students in both English and math, respectively, that are demonstrating proficiency. So that's why we're comfortable taking a risk, because we're seeing the results pay off, and it's truly been successful. But I did say at a state board meeting, and I stand by that, children are a gift, not just a gift, but a gift from God. And I look at that with great value. I look at it with the highest level of value. And if you look at a student with the highest level of value on this earth, then that you will understand why we are motivated to deliver a world-class education system, because they are deserving of nothing less. And so that is our motivation here at the Florida Department of Education, to ensure that every day we come to work, we are providing not just opportunities for children, but we are providing successful opportunities to their academic success. We are providing opportunities that are going to give them exposure to that character formation. I know at the traditional public school we have a resiliency curriculum that is proven to be not just successful, but appreciated by superintendents, principals, and teachers alike, because you talk about things that, during that instruction, where I think a student can learn from the value of, in life, things are not going to be handed to you. You are going to have obstacles. Times will be tough. But it is important to understand you can persevere through challenges. You can work hard and pick yourself up by the bootstraps, particularly in this country, the United States of America, which is the greatest country, the most educational opportunities. And that motivation comes from my grandparents, who fled communist Cuba in 1960 and told me that in this country, you have opportunity through education to do anything you want. It truly is the great equalizer. It does not matter where you started from. You can, through education, be on a pathway to prosperity. And I'm pretty convicted about that. And it's important that we look at education to achieve that, because there are students that are coming from all kinds of walks of life, all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds, and it should not matter. They should see an educational opportunity and be met with exposure to that, just like a student who's affluent or a student who's from the working class family. Everybody should be able to walk into a school setting and be exposed to opportunity and an ability to achieve through education.
Yeah, and look, and as you come towards, the end of your time, as commissioner, and the end of this administration, I'm just curious, what does the future of education look like in Florida? What do you hope to see? Obviously, at Polk State College, you're going to have a role there, and you'll still be fighting the fight in the trenches from a different perspective. But what do you hope for the future of education in Florida? What would you hope to see from superintendents, from school board members moving forward?
I think it's this realignment of perspective and understanding that the student is the client, the student is the customer, that is who you serve. Ensuring that you are giving them as much opportunity to be successful. When it comes to higher ed, for example, affordability is a big part of it. So holding the line on tuition, holding the line on how we can, provide financial aid or scholarship to these students so that they're not disincentivized to pursue education by financial limitations. That is what I love about school choice. That is what has transformed the landscape. You have students that are in some of the poorest communities that are now looking at an ability to attend a private school that they would have never dreamed of before because of these scholarship programs. And I applaud President Trump and Secretary McMahon at the federal level because to do the One Big Beautiful Bill, they were able to enact the federal tax credit scholarship, which will provide even more funding for low-income families. And I think that's great. You should have that single mother who's struggling to make ends meet and has multiple children have an ability to see, you know what, even though times are tough for us, my child can still have the same opportunity as that affluent family because of this country's investment in our children's future. And that same investment is something I want to see in higher education, whether it's a workforce program, whether it's going to the college to then articulate into a university, whatever the pathway is for that student, we want to make sure that it's one that is met with the least amount of obstacles. We want them to be passionate about education and see true value in themselves through an ability to achieve and to not just achieve academically, but to now go into the workforce and become a responsible citizen that gives back to their community in various ways, shapes, and sizes.
Well, look, thanks so much for sitting down. It was great to have a
course.
conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.